They started laughing the moment she opened her lunch. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't polite. It was the kind of laughter that filled the entire chamber, sharp, layered, echoing with superiority. The kind of laughter that didn't just mock a moment, but a species. The Council of Deathworld leaders rarely agreed on anything. But in that moment, they all agreed on one thing. Humans were unimpressive. The chamber itself reflected the power gathered within it, massive, reinforced, built to withstand extremes most worlds could never survive. Heat-tolerant alloys lined the walls. Atmospheric regulators hummed quietly, compensating for the wildly different environmental needs of each species present. Some thrived in radiation levels that would melt human tissue. Others existed comfortably in pressures that would crush a human body instantly. Every being in that room came from a world classified as hostile, lethal, or outright impossible by galactic standards. And they were proud of it. Strength defined status, survival defined superiority, and by every known measure, humans ranked low, new to interstellar politics, physically average, lacking natural weapons, no claws, no armored hide, no venom, no environmental extremes to boast about, just adaptable, which, to them, sounded like weakness. The human delegation sat quietly along one side of the chamber. Professional. Control. Aware of the imbalance in perception, but unwilling to challenge it directly. Diplomacy required restraint. Most of them remained focused on the proceedings, all except one. She sat slightly apart, not out of disrespect, but because she simply didn't seem interested in the tension filling the room. Younger than the others. Calm. Observant. Completely unbothered. And now, she was eating. A small container rested in her hands. Nothing advanced, no specialized packaging, no environmental sealing. Just a simple, human-made box. She opened it without ceremony. That was when the laughter started. The first reaction came from a towering figure seated near the center, its form partially obscured by a shimmering heat field that distorted the air around it. Its species thrived in extreme temperatures, their internal chemistry designed to withstand what others would call fire. It leaned forward slightly, its voice carrying a tone of amused disbelief. "You bring nourishment into a council session?" The translator rendered its words smoothly, but the tone was unmistakable. Mockery. Another voice joined in, sharper, more abrasive. "Observe the human." Unable to regulate consumption cycles even in formal assembly, a third added, slower, more deliberate. Primitive behavior. Instinct over discipline. The laughter spread again. The human girl didn't look up. She simply reached into the container, picked up a piece of food, and took a bite. Unhurried. Unaffected. That seemed to make it worse. One of the leaders activated a localized scan, the faint hum of its device cutting through the noise. It angled the sensor toward her container, clearly intending to make a point. "Let us examine this meal," it said, voice dripping with curiosity masked as ridicule. The scan began. At first, nothing happened, just a stream of data scrolling across its interface. Then, it paused. A subtle shift. Barely noticeable, but enough. The leader adjusted the scan parameters, narrowing its focus. "Interesting," it muttered. Another leaned in. "What is it?" The first didn't answer immediately. Instead, it ran the scan again. Slower this time. More precise. The data returned. And this time, it didn't laugh. A faint alert flickered across its display. It frowned. Or whatever passed for a frown among its kind. "Chemical composition. Irregular," it said. That drew a few more glances. Not concern. Not yet. Just curiosity. The human girl continued eating. Another bite. Still calm. Still silent. Another leader activated its own scanner, more advanced, more sensitive. It targeted a different item in her container, a brightly colored piece with a strong, distinct chemical signature. "Allow me," it said. The scan completed faster, and the reaction was immediate. Its posture shifted. Slightly, but noticeably. That cannot be correct. The first leader turned toward it. Clarify. The second adjusted its display, projecting the data outward for others to see. Toxicity levels, it said slowly, exceed safe thresholds. A pause. Then, almost defensively, for most species, a few of them chuckled again, though less confidently this time. Define most, someone said. The scanner recalibrated. Ran again. The results didn't change. Lethal, it stated. Within seconds, silence didn't fall, but the laughter thinned. The human girl reached for something else. A different item. She took a bite. Swallowed, unbothered. Another leader activated a broader scan, sweeping across the entire container. Multiple readings appeared, multiple alerts, acidity warnings, thermal reactions, chemical instability. Each one flagged as hazardous, each one categorized as dangerous, individually, concerning, together, impossible. Is this a contamination issue? One asked. No, came the reply. The compounds are stable. In combination, that should not be possible. It is. They watched her more closely now. Not openly, not yet, but the shift had begun. She didn't notice. Or didn't care. Another bite, another swallow, no reaction, no visible strain, no protective measures, nothing, just eating. The first leader leaned back slightly, its earlier amusement gone. Run a full biological correlation, it ordered. The scanners complied, cross-referencing the chemical data with known biological tolerances. The results took longer this time. Processing. Comparing, calculating. When they returned, no one laughed. The data was clear, unambiguous. For their species, and most others in the council, what she was consuming would trigger immediate systemic failure. Cellular breakdown, neural collapse, death, fast, painful, certain, and she was eating it like it was nothing. One of them spoke, voice lower now. That is, her standard nutrition? No one answered. Because no one knew. But the evidence suggested one thing. This wasn't unusual for her. There was no hesitation, no caution, no preparation, just routine. The human girl paused briefly, glancing down at her container as if considering her next bite. Then, she continued. Calm, unaware of the growing tension, or perhaps simply unconcerned. The council chamber, once filled with arrogance and laughter, now carried something else, something quieter, something sharper. Not fear, not yet, but the first edge of it. And no one, in that moment, could explain why. The laughter didn't come back. It faded into something thinner, uncertain, replaced by quiet exchanges and sharper attention. What had started as ridicule was now being measured, tested, questioned. The girl kept eating. Another piece lifted, another bite. Slow, steady, completely normal. One of the leaders increased the sensitivity of its scanner, narrowing the beam to isolate a single item from her container. The display filled with data, dense, complex, layered with chemical markers. It froze mid-analysis. A warning icon flashed. Rerun, it ordered. The system complied. Same result. It adjusted parameters again, pushing the device beyond standard calibration limits. The numbers didn't change. Toxin classification confirmed, it said, voice lower now. Organic compound. High volatility. Reactive under most biological conditions. A second leader leaned closer, its own instruments activating in response. Define threshold. Lethal exposure in under 10 seconds. A pause. For your species? Someone asked. For nearly all registered species within this council. That answer landed differently. The room shifted. No one spoke immediately, because they all understood what that meant. The girl took another bite. No reaction, no protective gear, no filtration, nothing, just normal consumption. A third scan targeted a different item, something sharper in profile, with a scent that registered even through environmental filters. The analysis returned faster this time. Acidity levels exceed structural tolerance, the scanner reported. Clarify, another demanded. It would dissolve organic tissue on contact. Silence. Not complete, but close. The first leader spoke again, more controlled now. And yet, it didn't finish the sentence. It didn't need to. They all saw it. She was fine. Perfectly fine. One of the council members shifted back slightly, increasing the distance between itself and the human delegation. The movement was subtle, but others followed. Instinct. Distance from hazard. Another scan initiated, broader, deeper, no longer focused on individual food items, but on the entire composition of her meal. Multiple warnings triggered at once. Thermal irregularities, chemical instability, biological incompatibility across dozens of known species, each flagged, each confirmed, each impossible to ignore. Cross-reference with human biological data, someone ordered. The system processed, pulled records, analyzed compatibility. The result appeared, and this time no one questioned it. Compatible, the system stated. A long pause followed. Then, more quietly, optimal. That word changed everything, because it didn't just mean survivable, it meant intended, designed for their system, sustained by it. The girl reached for another piece, this one releasing a faint vapor as she lifted it. The sensors picked it up immediately. Volatile compound detected, one of the leaders said. Isolate it. The scan zoomed in, the data spiked. Thermal response potential, extreme. How extreme? The answer came without hesitation. Combustion level interaction under standard atmospheric conditions, another pause. Inside a biological system? The scanner hesitated. Then, unpredictable, likely catastrophic, they watched her place it in her mouth, chew, swallow. Nothing happened. No visible reaction. No sign of distress. Just normal behavior. One of the leaders spoke, voice tight now. That is not possible. Another responded, quieter. It is happening. A different voice, sharper, edged with something new. Then, our understanding is incomplete. The first leader turned slightly, its earlier confidence replaced by focus. Run a metabolic simulation, the system complied, using available human biological data and the chemical profile of the food. The projection appeared, and it was worse than expected. For our species, the system began, ingestion would result in immediate internal failure. For others, varies, none survive. And for humans? The system paused, processing. Then, integrated, not resisted, not neutralized, integrated. The word hung in the air, because it implied something deeper than tolerance. It implied adaptation. Evolution. One of them leaned back further. If their biology is designed to process this, another finished the thought. Then their baseline environment must contain similar compounds. A quiet realization spread. Slow. Heavy. If this is normal, someone said, then their world, no one completed that sentence either. They didn't need to. The implications were already forming. The girl adjusted her position slightly, still focused on her meal. She seemed completely unaware of the shift in the room, or simply uninterested in it. Another bite. Another swallow. The sensors tracked everything now, every movement, every chemical interaction, every impossible confirmation. A senior member of the council activated a deeper scan, one that required authorization. It bypassed standard limits, pulling data directly from the chamber's environmental systems, comparing airborne particles, residual traces, and indirect exposure levels. Running atmospheric correlation, it said. The system processed quickly. Trace emissions detected, it reported. Source? The human meal. Effect? The answer came with a warning tone. Prolonged exposure would degrade protective membranes. A ripple of movement passed through the council. Subtle, controlled, but unmistakable. They were adjusting distance again. Not dramatically, not openly, but enough. Because now it wasn't just ingestion, it was proximity. The girl paused for a moment, glancing at the container, as if deciding whether she was finished. Then, she continued. unhurried, unconcerned. One of the leaders spoke, voice lower than before. Why is she unaffected? Another answered, because for her, this is not harmful. That does not explain it. It does. A beat. Her biology is built for it. Silence settled again. Not empty, not calm, but focused, tight. Another leader, one of the oldest present, spoke slowly. We classified humans as mid-tier survivability. No one corrected it, because that had been the consensus. Based on incomplete data, it added. A faint shift of agreement moved through the room. Another voice, quieter but sharper. We assumed adaptability meant weakness. No one laughed at that, because now it sounded like a mistake. The scanners continued to run, but the purpose had changed. They weren't looking for flaws anymore. They were trying to understand a threat they hadn't recognized. The girl took the last bite from her container. Closed it. Set it aside. Simple. Finished. She wiped her hands casually, then looked up for the first time since she started eating. Her expression was neutral, calm, completely unaware of the calculations, the fear beginning to form, the shift in perception that had just taken place. To her, it had just been lunch. To them, it was something else entirely, and no one, in that moment, felt comfortable pretending otherwise. No one resumed the discussion. The agenda remained open, data still projected, protocol still active, but attention had shifted entirely. What had seemed trivial minutes ago now demanded explanation. They weren't watching her out of curiosity anymore. They were studying her. Every movement, every breath, every residual trace left in the air. The scans didn't stop. They intensified. A deeper biochemical analysis was initiated, one that mapped not just the substances she consumed, but how those substances interacted with a human system in real time. The projections formed quickly, layered models of digestion, absorption, integration. The results were precise. Too precise. These compounds are not merely tolerated, one of them said, voice tight. They are processed efficiently, defined efficiently, converted, utilized, distributed as energy without significant cellular damage. A pause. That contradicts earlier toxicity classifications. No, came the reply. It confirms them. Silence pressed in. Because that meant one thing. The toxicity wasn't incorrect. It was contextual, deadly to them, normal to her. Another scan cross-referenced environmental data pulled from known human worlds. Atmospheric samples, soil composition, microbial density, trace chemical presence. The comparison aligned. Baseline human environment contains analogous compounds, the system reported. How analogous? Within survivable thresholds for humans. Outside survivable thresholds for most species. A long pause followed. Then, quietly, they evolved in this. No one challenged that conclusion. They couldn't. The data supported it. Every piece. One of the leaders shifted again, increasing distance just slightly more than before. Others followed, not out of panic, but out of recalculation. Proximity now had variables. Unknown ones. She exhibits no defensive behavior, another observed. Because she does not perceive a threat, or because she does not need to, that landed harder than anything before. Because it reframed everything. The assumption had always been that humans lacked natural defenses, no claws, no armor, no venom. But now, the definition of defense was changing. One of the analysts brought up a comparative chart, species resilience versus environmental hostility. Humans had always been placed in the middle range. Now the model adjusted, not upward in raw durability, but in adaptability, in tolerance, in internal processing. A different kind of strength. She is ingesting substances that trigger failure cascades in our systems, one of them said, and not reacting. Correct. Not resisting. Correct. Not even noticing, a quiet voice answered. Because for her, there is nothing to notice. The realization spread again. Deeper this time. They had misjudged the baseline, not by a small margin, But fundamentally, one of the leaders accessed historical records, limited data on human biology gathered from early contact reports. Fragmented, incomplete, focused on surface-level traits. Insufficient, it said flatly. Another responded. We classified them without full exposure analysis, and without understanding their environmental origin. That was the key. Not their appearance, not their behavior, their origin. If their world produces these compounds naturally, one began, another finished. Then survival there requires constant exposure and constant adaptation and constant tolerance. The chain of logic built itself, step by step, until the conclusion was unavoidable. They are not resilient in spite of their environment, one of them said slowly. They are resilient because of it. Silence followed. Heavy, because that meant every human, not just this one, shared that baseline. The girl shifted slightly, adjusting her posture now that she was finished eating. Her movements remained relaxed, unguarded. She glanced briefly toward the council, noticing the attention for the first time. But she didn't react, didn't question it, didn't even seem particularly interested. That lack of response unsettled them more than anything. Why is she not aware of the risk? One asked. Because there is no risk to her. That does not account for our reaction. She has no reason to account for it. Another pause. Then, she does not perceive us as threatened. The implication settled slowly. Then, all at once, she does not perceive us as dangerous. That shifted the dynamic completely. Not equal, not cautious, below. The first leader, the one who had initiated the scan, spoke again, its voice measured now, stripped of earlier arrogance. Evaluate potential for weaponization. The system processed immediately. Chemical agents present in human dietary intake could be refined into delivery systems, it reported. Effectiveness? High, against most known biological structures. A ripple of unease passed through the council. Because this wasn't speculation anymore. It was feasibility. If these compounds are common, one said quietly, then their capacity for escalation is significant. Another added, they would not need to develop new weapons. A pause. They would only need to concentrate what they already use. The room tightened. The girl looked at them again, this time more directly. Not with suspicion, not with awareness of what was unfolding, just simple observation. Waiting, one of the leaders lowered its voice further. If this is what they give to their young, no one interrupted, then what do they reserve for conflict? The question hung in the air. Unanswered. Unanswerable. Because no data existed, no precedent, only inference. And the inference was enough. The council members adjusted again, this time less subtly. Distance increased. Environmental controls shifted slightly, compensating for perceived contamination risk. No one acknowledged it. But everyone noticed. The girl blinked once, then leaned back slightly in her seat. Still calm, still composed, still completely unthreatened. That was the final piece. Not aggression, not dominance, but absence of concern. She wasn't trying to intimidate them. She wasn't demonstrating power. She wasn't even aware that she had. And yet, the effect was undeniable. One of the older leaders spoke, its voice quieter than it had ever been. We misunderstood them. Another responded immediately. Yes. A third added, completely. The first leader didn't argue, didn't defend the earlier assessment. Because there was nothing left to defend. The data had rewritten everything. What they thought was weakness was misinterpretation. What they thought was simplicity was ignorance. What they thought was harmless was anything but. They weren't looking at a fragile species. They were looking at a system built to survive conditions they themselves avoided. And they had laughed at it. That realization settled in with weight. Because it didn't just change how they saw her. It changed how they saw humanity. And for the first time since she opened that container, no one in the room felt superior anymore, that the silence didn't break on its own. It tightened, drawn thin by calculations no one wanted to finish, and conclusions no one could avoid. Protocol still waited for decisions, but the council no longer trusted its own assumptions. They had measured her. Now they were measuring themselves. One of the leaders finally spoke, voice controlled, stripped of anything that resembled earlier arrogance. Human. The translator carried the word clearly. The girl looked up. State the classification of your nourishment. No hostility. No accusation. Just a question, carefully chosen. She blinked once, as if surprised the discussion had shifted to her. It's just lunch, she said. Simple, direct, uncomplicated. The answer didn't help. What is its composition? Another asked, more precise now. She glanced at the empty container, thinking for a second. Spicy noodles, she said. Pickled fruit. Some snacks. She paused. Nothing special, nothing special. The phrase echoed harder than any alarm, because every scan had said otherwise. One of the leaders leaned forward slightly. Define spicy, she shrugged. Hot. Flavorful. The system translated the words, but not the meaning behind them. Quantify, it pressed. She hesitated. I don't know, it's normal where I'm from. Normal. Again. That word closed the gap between data and reality. Another leader stepped in, voice lower. The acidic compounds in the fruit, are they processed? She shook her head. It's just preserved. We eat it like that. No filtration. No neutralization. No protective measure. Direct exposure. Routine. A subtle shift passed through the chamber as several members adjusted their positions again, increasing distance without acknowledging why. Your species consumes this regularly? One asked. Yes. How frequently? Daily, I guess. The answer settled like weight. Daily exposure. Sustained intake, no degradation, no adaptation phase, just baseline. One of the analysts initiated a final confirmation scan, cross-referencing her statements with the chemical data already gathered. The results aligned perfectly. There was no anomaly, no special case, no unique condition. This wasn't an exception. This was standard. The leader who had first mocked her spoke again, but its tone had changed completely. There are no adverse effects? She looked at it, confused. From food? A small shake of her head. No. The room absorbed that. Not disbelief, not denial, acceptance. Because every system in the chamber had already confirmed it. One of the older members spoke quietly, almost to itself. Then their baseline tolerance exceeds our maximum thresholds. Another added. By a significant margin. The first leader straightened slightly. And this is not considered extreme? The girl frowned a little, thinking. It's just what we eat, she said. Everyone does. That ended it. There was no higher level to escalate to, no hidden variable left to uncover. Everything they had seen, everything they had feared, was normal. A long silence followed. Then, slowly, the shift completed. One of the council members lowered its posture, not dramatically, not theatrically, but enough to register across the room. A gesture. Subtle. Deliberate. De-escalation. Another followed. Then, another. It wasn't submission in the traditional sense, but it was close. Clarify human intent, the first leader said carefully. The girl blinked again. What do you mean? Your presence. Your species' purpose within this council. She seemed genuinely puzzled now. We're here to talk, she said. Trade. Agreements. Same as everyone else. No hidden meaning. No layered threat. Just diplomacy. That is all? Another asked. Yes. A pause. You do not intend hostility? She tilted her head slightly. Why would we? The question landed harder than any accusation. Because to her, the idea hadn't even existed. One of the leaders exhaled slowly, its form relaxing for the first time since the scans began. Because, it said quietly, your biology suggests capability. She didn't respond immediately. Not because she was hiding anything, but because she didn't understand the premise. "We're not here to hurt anyone," she said after a moment. Simple, unforced. True. The systems in the chamber registered no deception, no stress indicators, no defensive signals, just a statement. The council processed it, carefully, because for the first time, they weren't evaluating humans based on assumptions, they were evaluating them based on evidence, and the evidence showed something unexpected. Not aggression, not dominance. Restraint. One of the analysts brought up a final projection, comparative models of biological capability versus behavioral output. Humans ranked high in tolerance, high in adaptability, high in potential escalation, but actual conflict data, lower than projected. Controlled, measured, a discrepancy. One of the older leaders spoke, voice steady now. They possess the means but not the inclination. Another responded, or the inclination is selective. That made more sense. Because nothing that resilient could be passive by accident. It had to be deliberate. The girl shifted slightly, glancing between them, still trying to understand why the conversation had changed so drastically. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked. The question cut through everything, all the analysis, all the fear, all the recalculation. Because from her perspective, nothing had happened. One of the leaders answered immediately. No. A pause. On the contrary, it searched for the right phrasing. "You have clarified much." She didn't look convinced, but she nodded anyway. Okay. The container remained closed in her hands. Empty, unremarkable. And yet it had rewritten their entire understanding. The first leader rose slightly, signaling the end of the exchange, not abruptly, not as a dismissal, but as a shift. "Human delegation," it said, voice steady, respectful now, "this council acknowledges your presence." A pause, "and your capabilities." The emphasis was intentional, measured, no longer dismissive. The girl didn't react to that part. She simply set the container aside and straightened a little. "Thanks," she said. Casual. Unburdened. The council didn't laugh, didn't question, didn't challenge. Because they had already seen enough. The meeting resumed, but it wasn't the same. Every calculation now included a new variable. Every decision accounted for a species they had fundamentally misunderstood, and no one in that room would make that mistake again, because they had watched a human child eat something ordinary, and learned that, on a human world, survival itself was extraordinary. They had mocked it, measured it, feared it, and in the end, respected it.